Prepare to starve as food shortages are going to get much worse. I'm your host, Steven Van Metre, and thanks for joining me today. And if you were hoping the food shortage issue was going to be getting better, well, I've got some bad news. It's going to get much, much worse in the months to come. Let's kick this off with a headline from Wall Street Journal. And this is the major story right now, that the war in Ukraine is the big problem and is already taking its toll on the global food supplies. The shortage of fuel, fertilizer, and workers caused by the Russian invasion will shrink an annual bounty that countries rely on around the world. And they do rely on Ukraine in a big way, as their nutrient-rich soils yield 10% of the global wheat exports, 14% of corn exports, and about half of the world's sunflower oil, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In just 3 weeks, war disrupted Ukraine agriculture, triggering higher prices, as well as the threat of global shortages. And much of those exports go to developing economies already struggling with food cost inflation. But this is just the beginning of where the story goes. As you're about to see, it's going to get even worse. Ukraine is the world's fourth and fifth largest exporter of corn and wheat, respectively, according to the USDA, and 85% of crop exports travel by sea, which, as right now, due to ports being closed, the country is trying to shift those through its western borders, and around 25 to 30% are heading to Romania, Poland, and Slovakia by train and other ports. And grain is used for animal feed, and the supply interruptions have already hit the meat industry. Quote, "We are seeing massive increases in the price of milk and meat, and this is not short term," according to an expert on international food supply chains. So you can see it's not going to just have, small issues with, further grain prices in terms of cereals and breads. It's going to impact poultry, eggs, and all kinds of things. But again, it's still going to get even worse. This is still just the tip of the iceberg. As oil surges past 100 a barrel has sent diesel futures in Europe and the U.S. to its highest in decades. Increasing fuel costs will raise expenses for farmers who have to run a lot of heavy machinery for sowing, tilling, and harvesting, and it'll be costlier to heat barns that house livestock. And prices for fertilizer used to grow practically all crops have also risen dramatically in the past year. A crunch for natural gas supply, of course, I remember when no one wanted it, elevated freight rates, tariffs, and extreme weather and sanctions on key producers in Belarus all contributed to the rally. And now Russia, the biggest exporter of urea and number 2 for potash, is seeking to end fertilizer exports, threatening a global shortage. The green market's North American fertilizer price index has doubled in the past 12 months to reach a record. And if farmers can't keep up with their higher costs, if they can't pass them on to you and I, they could be forced to pull back on production, leaving the global food supply situation even more precarious. Now, what does all of this mean when we see food prices rising, commodity prices rising? If you're saying that we're tipping on the edge of a global recession, well, you've got it right. Check this chart out here. And what we can see, we don't have any data on wheat or corn prices shown in red and green respectively going prior to 1990, but you see those higher prices led to a recession. We had a soft recession in 94, not an official one, as prices across the 3, crude oil being in blue, rose. We can see going into the dot-com bubble, prices were back rising from low points. We can see going into the great financial crisis. We can see we nearly had a double-dip recession around 2011-12 as prices on corn, wheat, and oil went up. We see 2018, we almost had a recession, and now we're on the verge of another one. And, if there's one thing that you shouldn't be concerned about, it's how your portfolio will react to a recession, because we talked about this last week about what the yield curve does to bond prices. And there's one strategy out there that hedges with bonds, and that's Portfolio Shield. And I'll put a link in the corner of the description below. Be sure to check it out. You'll be glad you did. But this situation's going to get worse because fertilizer sanctions are now on the table. Split farm superpowers as costs surge. And Brazil wants fertilizers to be kept free from Russia's sanctions. And again, this is all happening at a time where everyone wants to sanction everything out of Russia, and for good reasons. But will there be humanitarian reasons that things will change? Well, this could be one of them, as the world's largest agricultural superpowers are divided over whether Russian fertilizers should be sanctioned, as surging prices threaten to stoke further food inflation. And of course, when people get hungry and they're not eating, well, that generally is not good for the lifespan of governments, as people tend to get very, very unhappy about that. And to make matters worse, as we come into Easter, well, there's going to be an egg problem too, because U.S. egg prices are rising as deadly bird flu strikes ahead of Easter, and millions of chickens are getting cold right now as you're watching this video because of the bird flu. And that is a huge problem. But how about months down the road? Is this going to all fix itself? Well, I got even more bad news. And this is really where we want to start the show with today, is just how bad it's going to be by this fall. Check this out. A spring outlook: drought to expand amid warmer conditions at a flood risk for upper Midwest, and Southeast, according to the National Organization of I actually don't know what the AA, I forget, issued a spring outlook. Hey, if you're ever wondering, this show is not edited. It is one cut. So now you know the truth. NOAA issued its U.S. spring outlook today. And for the second year in a row, forecasters predict prolonged persistent drought in the West, where below average precipitation is most likely. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, part of the National Weather Service, is also forecasting above average temperatures for most of the U.S. from the desert Southwest to the East Coast and north throughout the Midwest to the Canadian border from April to June. And that's going to have a huge impact. Here you can see that the drought tendency on practically the entire western United States is going to get significantly worse. And that is a challenge for farmers because severe to exceptional drought has persisted in some areas of the West, heavy farming areas, since the summer of 2020, and drought has expanded to the southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley. Our operational prediction branch of NOAA's Climate Prediction Center says with nearly 60% of the continental U.S. experiencing minor to exceptional drought conditions, this is the largest drought coverage we've seen since 2013. And of course, what does all that translate to? When we think about farmers, if they can't, plant seeds and grow them because they have no water, that's only going to make the situation even worse. And how does this flow back to the consumer? Well, you've heard this phrase perhaps that higher prices are the cure to higher prices. Well, when consumers have to dedicate more money to food and energy, it leaves less money to discretionary spending. And as those other prices go up, discretionary spending shrinks really fast. So you start to understand a bit is why higher prices are a cure for higher prices. Notice it's the same as higher home prices are the cure for higher home prices. Higher interest rates are a cure for higher interest rates, because at some level, prices, interest rates, home prices, you name it, get so high that people can't afford them, and then they reverse directions. That's why you see in the consumer price index, and we know where this is eventually going to go, is people are going to reject prices. And perhaps the more bigger story that we'll have to talk about soon is the Fed driving the economy into a recession to actually starve off inflation. And with that, I'm Steve Van Metre. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being fans. We'll see you soon. Bye now. The content of this video is prized educational information only. Is not intended to provide investment or other advice. You're not allowed to be construed as a recognition or solicitation by selling security, financial instrument, or participate in any particular trading strategy. This video was prepared by Steve Van Metre, personal capacity. The images expressed in this video that do not affect the value of Financial Inc. or Steven Van Metre Financial.